Is the chaos at the border bankrupting America's cities and states?
Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting a deep dive today into the costs, both financial and, well, public safety costs tied to illegal immigration. And these costs, they're huge, and they're hitting every American.
That's right. The total hit to U.S. taxpayers, the net cost, is estimated around $150.7 billion every single year.
And that number, $150 billion, it's not just some abstract figure floating around D.C., right? This is directly impacting local budgets, your community's budget.
Exactly. Resources that could go to roads, schools, maybe even tax relief in your town.
So today we're going straight to the sources. We want to see, where is this money actually going? Why are state and local governments footing most of the bill? And, how is this whole political fight over sanctuary policies creating real enforcement problems? We're seeing things like that recent federal lawsuit against Minnesota, for example.
Right. And our mission here is really to break down those big numbers, connect them to what it actually means for you, the taxpayer. We've got financial analysis showing a gross cost of $182 billion. Wow, $182 billion gross.
Yeah, and honestly, many analysts think even that number might be low. It's hard to track everything like the social costs of gang activity or trafficking. But the key takeaway on the net cost, that $150.7 billion, those here illegally contribute about $31 billion in taxes. That only covers about 17% of the costs they generate. So we're going to look at where that financial burden piles up, especially for local taxpayers, and then dive into the political and legal battles over jurisdictions that don't cooperate with federal enforcement.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, right? Because most people probably think, okay, border issue, federal government pays. But the sources we looked at show it's really uneven. The weight lands squarely on states and local areas.
That's the surprising part for many folks. The majority of this financial burden, specifically $100.4 billion a year in net fiscal loss, that falls on state and local governments.
$100 billion out of the $150 billion total.
Yeah, basically two-thirds of the whole impact. The federal government's net loss is about $50.2 billion. So states and localities are bearing the brunt. It's a huge cost shift.
But wait, the border is federal, right? So why are states and cities stuck with $100 billion of the net cost?
It really comes down to unfunded mandates and who provides the direct services. States have to provide things like education, emergency medical care. It doesn't matter what someone's immigration status is.
Okay.
And if you break it down per taxpayer, the sources suggest every American taxpayer is shelling out, on average, $956 net every year, just for costs related to illegal immigration.
Hold on, $956. Let's just sit with that for a second. That's not just some number in the federal deficit. For an average family listening, that's real money. That could be, what, a month of utilities, a big chunk of property taxes? Gone annually.
That's the tangible impact. And when you look at that $100.4 billion hitting states and localities, three areas really stand out as budget busters. Number one, by far, is K-12 education. That costs taxpayers about $70.4 billion a year.
$70 billion for schools alone?
Yeah.
Why is education such a massive piece of this?
Well, it goes back to a big Supreme Court case, Pilar v. Doe, back in '82. That ruling basically forces every state to provide free public K-12 education to all kids, regardless of immigration status.
Ah, so it's mandated, but the feds don't necessarily pay for it.
Precisely. It's the classic unfunded mandate. The federal government requires it, but the states pick up the tab. And on top of that, the sources show that educating students with limited English proficiency, LEP students, which is a group, heavily overrepresented in illegal alien households, cost about 15% more than educating other students. You need specialized teachers, translation, smaller classes, things like that.
Okay, so $70 billion just for schools. That's before we even get to things like crime and justice costs.
Right. The second biggest hit locally is the administration of justice. We're talking policing, courts, jails.
Yeah.
That totals about $21.8 billion net for states and localities.
$21 billion, wow.
And get this, $6.21 billion of that is just for incarcerating criminal illegal aliens in state prisons and local jails.
$6 billion just for incarceration locally. Now, I know there's a federal program. SCAP, isn't that supposed to help reimburse those costs?
It is, but it's, frankly, completely insufficient. The State Criminal Alien Assistance Program, SCAP, it covers only about 2 to 5% of that $6.21 billion, just a tiny fraction.
2 to 5%. So local communities are basically paying almost the entire cost to house federal immigration-related inmates.
That's pretty much it. They're diverting funds meant for local police, roads, whatever, to handle what is essentially a federal responsibility. The states are definitely left holding the bag on that one.
Okay, education justice.
Yeah.
What's the third big state and local cost?
Medical expenses. This is a constant drain, especially, in states that have broader welfare policies.
Yeah.
Estimated state-level medical costs are around $18.6 billion.
18.6 billion.
And this gets inflated by a couple of things. First, about $4.5 billion comes from uncompensated care. Because many folks here illegally don't have insurance, they often end up using emergency rooms for basic healthcare needs.
And hospitals have to treat them legally.
Exactly. Federal law mandates that, regardless of ability to pay. Then you have states like California that are actively expanding state health coverage like Medi-Cal to include illegal aliens. That decision alone costs California taxpayers about $4.8 billion a year.
So you add education, justice, medical, and that's how you get to that staggering $100 billion hitting state and local budgets, affecting services and taxes right where you live.
Okay, let's switch gears to the federal side. What's driving their $66.4 billion in gross spending?
Well, looking at federal enforcement costs, which totaled about $25.1 billion, one thing really jumps out recently: the cost for caring for unaccompanied minors, or UAMs.
Yeah, we hear a lot about that. The spending there just exploded. It hit $8 billion in fiscal year 2022 alone. And if you break that down, it amounts to spending an incredible $61,584 per unaccompanied minor who entered the shelter system that year.
$61,000 per child per year. For comparison, that's almost double the average annual cost of in-state tuition and fees at a public university, just for shelter and care for 1 year.
Precisely. It really shows the scale of the resources needed at the border right now. And beyond just enforcement, you also have federal welfare and tax implications.
Right, because even if illegal aliens themselves aren't eligible for most federal welfare, their U.S.-born kids often are.
Exactly. The money flows indirectly. The biggest example in the sources is SNAP, the food stamp program. Benefits going to the citizen children of illegal aliens cost the federal government nearly $5.76 billion a year.
Okay.
But perhaps the biggest shock on the federal side is actually the tax system itself.
How so? Many work and pay some taxes, don't they?
They do, but the sources point to a net federal loss of billions because of how the system works.
A net loss. How does that happen?
It's because of refundable tax credits. Things like the Additional Child Tax Credit, ACTC, and the Earned Income Tax Credit, EITC. Eligible illegal aliens often receive more money back from these credits than they actually paid in income tax.
More back than they paid in.
Yeah. It results in a net federal loss of $4.24 billion annually. Because these credits are refundable, they get paid out even if the person had zero or very little income tax liability to begin with. It essentially becomes a government payment funded by other taxpayers. They're pulling money out of the federal treasury, net-net.
Okay, so we've kind of dissected the $150 billion financial cost. Let's connect this now to public safety, because that often gets tangled up in politics, right? What happens financially and socially when cities or states decide not to cooperate with federal immigration law?
Yeah, we're talking about sanctuary policies. Basically, places that refuse to cooperate with federal enforcement, usually by rejecting ICE detainer requests. And the source material, including statements from the White House, is pretty blunt. They argue these policies undermine law enforcement and endanger our communities.
Okay, so what does rejecting a detainer request actually mean on the ground?
It means that when local law enforcement arrests an illegal alien for a crime, even a serious one, and ICE asks them to hold that person so they can pick them up for deportation proceedings, the local jail just lets them go.
They just release them back into the community.
Exactly. Even if they're a known criminal alien, ICE wants to deport. The sources cite examples like in San Francisco, where criminal illegal aliens were arrested repeatedly for things like rape, assault, selling drugs, released each time after ICE detainers were ignored. And that's why you see things like the recent Department of Justice lawsuit against Minnesota, against Minneapolis and St. Paul. The DOJ argues their sanctuary policies let dangerous criminals avoid removal, which just forces ICE to try and find them later out in the community, which is riskier and more expensive for everyone.
And this is where it shifts from just dollars and cents to, well, human cost. You hear GOP leaders pointing to tragic cases like the murders of Laken Riley or Ruby Garcia, saying these crimes would not have been committed if these individuals hadn't been shielded from federal enforcement by local policies.
That's the core argument. that when local authorities refuse cooperation, they're creating an unnecessary risk. And this defiance, it also creates these huge, unquantifiable costs related to things like gang crime, drug trafficking, human smuggling.
Yeah.
We just can't put an exact number on it when jurisdictions won't share data or cooperate. It becomes a sort of known unknown in the total cost calculation.
So, with all this defiance, what's the current administration doing? How are they trying to push back and enforce federal law in the interior? Looks like the sources show a big push for federal-local partnerships.
Yes, the main strategy being pushed hard is reviving and expanding the 287G program. This is basically a voluntary agreement where local police or sheriff's deputies can be deputized to perform certain immigration enforcement tasks.
Kind of like a force multiplier for IC.
Exactly. And specifically, they're focusing on reviving the task force model, the TFM. That lets these deputized local officers enforce immigration laws during their regular duties, like on traffic stops or patrols. It's broader than the older jail enforcement model, which just applied inside jails.
And the numbers show this expansion is happening fast.
Oh, yeah, it's dramatic. As of April 2025, IC had signed more than 450 of these agreements, these MOAs, across 38 states. And you're seeing Republican-led states actually mandating cooperation now.
Mandating it.
Yeah, Florida passed a law, SB 1908, requiring jails to partner with ICE through 287G. Texas has proposed SB 8, which would force urban counties to do the same. They're trying to compel compliance.
And is this push working? Are states getting off the sanctuary list?
We've seen some movement. Nevada was actually the first state officially removed from the sanctuary designation after their governor signed an agreement for full cooperation with ICE, including rejoining the 287G program.
Interesting. But doesn't this cost the local departments money, too, to participate?
It does. There are costs involved. Prince William County of Virginia, for instance, they estimated their costs at $6.4 million in the first year of their program. But the federal government seems aware of this pushback.
Right.
They're now offering what they call full-scale indemnification to try and encourage participation, basically covering legal costs if localities get sued for cooperating. It's part of the strategy to counter that sanctuary defiance.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. We've walked through this massive financial burden, over $150 billion net cost annually to taxpayers for illegal immigration. We saw how the biggest hits, education and justice, land disproportionately on state and local budgets because of unfunded mandates.
Right.
And we've seen this deep political divide playing out. The federal government pushing for enforcement cooperation through programs like 287G, while some jurisdictions actively resist with sanctuary policies, which sources argue protect criminals and create public safety risks.
Yeah, and if we take a step back and look at the bigger picture, given that the sources themselves, the analysts, suggest the actual cost is likely considerably higher than that already huge $150.7 billion figure.
Because of lack of transparency and those hard-to-calculate costs like gang crime, community impact.
Exactly. So the final thought, the real question left for you, the taxpayer, is this. What is the true bottom line? And maybe more importantly, how high does that number, both the known and the unknown costs, have to climb before Congress feels compelled, as some sources demand, to actually overhaul our immigration system back to one that, in their words, places the interests of Americans first?
A tough question, and definitely something for everyone listening to think about.